Good morning, you beautiful strangers. It is Saturday morning in mid-April, and I am about to play in yet another chess tournament. Got to be quick this morning because I only have 7 minutes until the round starts. I woke up like 30 minutes ago and had to just throw on clothes and sprint out the door because I did not wake up as early as I hoped to because I have been sleeping terribly this week. So, am I warmed up and super prepared for this week? No, actually, not at all. Now, my hope at the beginning of the week was to study a bunch of gambit lines and play in the style of the romantic chess era of the early 1800s. But the reality is that I didn't have a ton of time to do that because work got really busy this week. So I only know a couple of lines. But if I can get a King's Gambit in, I'll consider the day a success. I really want to play a King's Gambit. I figure if I'm gonna lose like I have been a bunch lately, I should at least lose spectacularly, and at least then my opponents won't know what's going on. Like if neither of us knows what's going on, I feel like maybe I've got a good shot. So we'll give that a shot. When I was describing this approach to my girlfriend, I was like, oh yes, I want to play like in the swashbuckling style of romantic chess players from the early 1800s. She was like, okay, so like chess but different, which kills me. I was laughing so hard. Um, I only have, it looks like 6 minutes until the first round starts. I'm playing in the under 1400 section. I'm down to 1233. My rating's not that great. I'll try and impute my what my new rating would be after every round when I like go home and do analysis after the tournament. But I'm not going to be able to tell you guys from the car like what this means about where I am so far. But in the under 1400 section, I'm the highest rated player. So if they don't change the sections, and I think there are about 10 players, in theory, like I should have an okay time. In practice, there are a bunch of players that are rated slightly below me, so we'll see how it goes. But I'm hopeful. Anyways, I'm going to quit blabbering about you guys and go to where the tournament is so that I don't miss the beginning of my game. I like to get stuff all set up. So I will see you guys later. Looking forward to chatting to you after the first game. Bye. All right, first round's over. First things first, I saw some geese and a gosling on my way over. I took a little picture. We'll hope it turns out well. If not, I'll cut this out. Yeah, so I played my first round against Anjali, where I did 857, I think. So that's a game that I should win. But I have to give her, I think it was her, I have to give her credit. She played pretty well. I played a King's Gambit, and she began to play into a line that like made some sense, and I played the wrong move in what that line is, and then yeah, things got spicy, and they sacrificed a pawn back in order to gain some more initiative, and there were a lot of things where it was unclear, like what should be done. But I was really proud. I sat there, I calculated. There were like a lot of interesting things to do, and because there was like a lot of stuff. Sorry, video cut out there. Anyways, because it was an attacking position for me, it was very easy for me to remain in the moment and calculating all of my possibilities because it wasn't, oh, my opponent can do this and what am I going to do and blah, blah, blah. It was like, okay, how do I continue to push and push and push? And that felt mentally easier. It turns out defending is harder than attacking. Who knew? I mean, everybody, but it's interesting to like learn from that experience. That being said, I'm not sure that I was better for that whole game. In fact, I'm not sure that I was better until the end, at which point I was definitely better because I was winning my opponent's queen. But yeah, oh gosh. And my opponent, I was surprised they didn't play it out. No, I'm used to people playing it out. There was a little life in the position. I think they were going to lose. I think they were going to lose their queen. But yeah, and I was very proud, like 3 moves from the end. I was going to play something which like my opponent captured a pawn, and I was like, oh, well, I can win the pawn back by like trading queens and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, wait, is there a better move? And instead I found a move that won their queen, which was not obvious to me initially. It should have been, but I'm dumb. So I was happy to have sat there and figured that out. So good start to the tournament. I felt a little bad. It's whenever you lose to a kid, you're like, oh my God, I lost to a kid. But whenever you beat a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, it's just a child. What am I doing? So hopefully I can get to play an adult in the next round. Next round doesn't start for, an hour and a half or so. And the NBA playoffs start in earnest today. So I was hoping to be able to also talk a little bit about what's going on in those games. But the first game's only like, 5 minutes in, so not really that interesting. So I'm gonna figure out. Maybe I'll go get some coffee. Maybe I'll try and grab an early lunch. I probably should. So I'll go find some lunch. But yeah, a first game. Anyways, let's take a look at the actual sequence of moves because it was very interesting. It was very fun at King's Gambit. All right, see you over the board. Okay, so let's take a look at game one. I'm playing white against Anjali. Rated about 857, and I told myself I'm going to play more aggressively, right? So I play e4. My opponent plays e5,
And normally what I would do is I would play knight f3, hoping to see knight c6. Here, I'll put it on the board, knight f3, knight c6, and then I can get into my exchange Ruy Lopez. Like, this is something I'm very familiar with. But not today. Today I wanted to play aggressively, so I played f4, the King's Gambit. And you'll notice that the computer prefers this for black than for white, but basically what you're trading is like material in exchange for activity. And so if you're really good at playing the defense for black, then you should come out ahead. And if you're not, it's going to be really hard. And so that's what I figured I would do. Let's get aggressive. Let's have like a fun, interesting game. Now, before we go any further, the moves that we hope to be able to get in from the white side is we want to be able to move our knight. We want to be able to get our bishop out to c4 to be able to target this pawn. We want to play something like d4 after this pawn has moved, and we want to get our bishop out somewhere along this diagonal, and then the last thing we want to be able to do is castle. Not necessarily in that order, but once we get to that point, we're going to have massive control of the center, and hopefully our opponent, by taking this pawn, is going to have wasted some time. So our opponent plays e takes f4, and of the moves that we could play, the only two moves that are reasonable are to play knight f3 and to play bishop c4. So first of all, we'll discuss bishop c4, and the main problem with this move is queen h4 check. So if we see something like this, I'm trying to remember what the problem is here. Yeah, let's look at the lines real quick. Ah, yes, they can just play takes, and if we play takes back, then they're just taking the rook, right? And if we don't play g3, then we have to move our king to f1 is the only reasonable place to put our king. So this is actually a line. You'll see it's only -1 for black, so it's not. We haven't actually gotten any worse, despite the fact that we're not castling. But it is hard to get this rook into the game. So that's not the way that I prefer to play. Instead, after e takes f4, I prefer to play with knight f3. And so the reason that our opponent can't play queen h4 check is we can just take the queen and then the game is over. Nobody ever does that, though. In fact, most commonly, again, you'll remember that our plan is to play something like, if our opponent makes nothing moves, d4, and now we have a threat on this bishop, right? A threat with our bishop on the pawn. And then we have this beautiful center, and there's no material disadvantage, right? So now if we make another like reasonable move for our opponent, we go here, you'll see that like white just has a clear advantage. We've got 4 pieces developed. Our opponent would have like 1 or 2 pieces developed. Like we control the entire center. We're closer to castling than our opponents. Like the advantage is pretty obvious here. So typically, there are several ways to play against the King's Gambit, but one of them is to try and hold onto this material for dear life by playing g5, which is what our opponent does. Now, we have to be flexible in our play, even though our plan is to get our bishop out and to move our pawn and to be attacking here. If we can't recapture with this bishop, then we're going to be at a material disadvantage. So then what has to be true is we not only have to be controlling the center, but we have to be posing practical problems for our opponent. In particular, we need to like increase the pressure. And the easiest way to do that is to attack this pawn, and if we can get rid of this pawn, then this pawn comes under threat again, and we're threatening to win material. So I played h4, and it turns out this is not necessarily the best move. The best move might be h3, just so our opponent can't push g4. But this is a standard book move for this line. Like this is not unreasonable for us. And so our opponent, now obviously we have to consider what happens if our opponent plays g4, and we don't have to do that hypothetically, because our opponent does play g4. Now, there are a few different squares for the knight, right? We could move back here, but that's pretty obviously bad. Then, like, our opponent has wedged their pawns in, and that doesn't seem in the spirit of what we're trying to do. And we can go to knight d4, but that gets in the way of the pawn that we want to be controlling the center. And so our choices are knight e5 and knight g5. Now, one thing that I did not realize is that knight g5 is actually really powerful. For example, if we see something like, f6, for example, I think this is actually really bad. Yeah, you'll see the computer is recognizing now this is bad for black, simply for the reason that we can play queen takes g4, and if my opponent takes the knight, we can play check. The king has to move out, and now we're basically a piece up, even though we're a piece down, because our opponent's king is stuck in the middle of the board. They're never going to be able to castle. Like, we have way more development than they do, even though it's their turn. This is really strong for us. So knight g5 is actually a reasonable move, because our opponent can't attack it. I just spent a little bit of time investigating why our opponent can't play h6 here, but the computer's not evaluating quickly enough for us to be able to make a good sense of this, so we're not going to really delve into that. Instead, we played the more sensible knight e5. Reason being that if, for example, we get attacked, we're taking this pawn, like, easy does it, no problem. And our opponent does attack us, except instead of with f6, they play g6, or d6, sorry, not g6. There's the g pawn's all the way down here. So we play knight takes g4. And so now our opponent should begin to like develop and recognize that they want to castle queenside. Our opponent instead thinks, like material is even again. Like I want to trade. This position's weird. I'm uncomfortable. And our opponent takes. And this is bad for them. You'll see that it's already 1.5 for black. And the reason is we have more development. We have 1, 2 moves to castle. Our opponent has 1, 2, 3 moves to castle if they're going to castle queenside. There's this open G file if they want to castle kingside. And it's difficult for them to develop their pieces naturally because we're going to be able to attack those squares pretty easily. In addition to that, this pawn is still weak. Like, if our opponent does some stuff to be able to castle to this side, our bishop is eventually going to be able to take this pawn. It's indefensible. So, not a good trade by our opponent. So we take back, and they play h5. They want to kick our queen. And this just gives up another pawn. Like, this weak pawn is gone. Now our queen is here instead of our bishop. But, you know, if we're going to have to move our queen, we might as well take the pawn so that even though it's indefensible, we might as well take it now. Like, there's no reason to, like, move back here and continue to hinder our development. Now, actually, like, threats on f7 are going to be even more serious. We'll see that come into play. Our opponent plays bishop h6. They want to kick the queen. The knight is defending, right? And they also then make it a little bit harder to develop here until after we've castled. So fair enough. I was trying to debate between queen f2 and queen f3. It turns out queen f3 is a little bit better. They don't have a light square bishop. It provides a little bit more space for us to maneuver around. It provides some threats in this direction as well if we ever push this pawn. But I played queen f2. It actually turns out to be only mildly worse than playing queen f3. We lose, you know, a third of a pawn or something. Our opponent plays knight f6, and I don't really understand that move. Like, it's defended by the queen, fine. And I guess they're attacking this pawn, but yeah. If you take that pawn, you're going to have problems here because we're going to pin you, and then if you try and defend, then we're going to cause you some problems. So anyway, our opponent plays knight f6 like we mentioned, and this doesn't seem like a real threat. So we just go ahead and play bishop c4, which is the best move in the position. If you try and defend, then like, okay, cool. So you've like lost your f pawn, and you end up with this weird thing where they're going to be able to attack you down the g file. You have to continue to play with initiative. You can't just be like, oh, okay, you know, we'll defend our stuff. No, we got to attack them. That's the whole point of what we're doing, right? Go get them. And our opponent plays queen e7, basically lining up against this pawn some more. They're not like quite ready to take here. Part of the reason there actually is that like, yeah, that's just checkmate. So that's the other reason that they can't take. So they play queen e7. They want to defend that checkmate threat, and now perhaps they can get the pawn. So we castle. And so now if we see here, we can takes, and takes, and this is just crushing for white. This knight is in an uncomfortable position. Their king is never going to be able to castle. It has to move now because this bishop is defended by the rook that we just got from castling. These pieces are in a weird state. Our king is actually surprisingly safe despite the fact that we don't have that much pawn cover. And we're going to be able to develop these pieces more easily than our opponent is going to be able to like develop because they're going to be in their own way. So our opponent correctly assesses that like this knight is under threat and they can't move it because then we have threats against the f7 pawn. So our opponent plays bishop g7. And so like apparently what the computer wants us to do is just go ahead and play here right away. I don't quite understand that move. I don't get it. I need to spend some more time with the evaluation there. But we just play t4 because what we want to do is we want to line up more threats against this pawn. You know, just attack the pinned piece. Again, this can't move. And our opponent makes sort of a lazy developing move here. They play knight c6, which in theory you're getting closer to castling, but that doesn't solve their problems. This knight isn't defended enough. For example, like they can't play rook here because the bishop is going to take. So they do have to find some way to resolve the threats against this knight and like pretty quickly. But they did not do that. And so I get to play bishop g5. We're attacking the pinned piece. If this moves, then we're going to have threats against the f7 pawn because we have all this stuff lined up. That's a drunk bishop. We have all this stuff lined up here. And not to mention, if this moves, we just get to take their queen. So not a great position for them because we have 1, 2, 3 attackers on this. They only have 2 defenders. And if they'd instead moved their knight here, they would have a 3rd defender and things would in theory be okay, except then we're still going to blast on the front door. So our opponent plays knight takes e4, and this is even worse. Now, the first thought is, okay, well, can't we do some of the same stuff where we play queen takes, bishop takes? And that gives up most of the advantage. You'll see that we're up 1 here, but the computer said we were up 10 a moment ago. And that's because we don't want to play queen takes, bishop takes. We want to play bishop takes. And I'm glad, actually, I spent some time on this move. In fact, if I take a look here, yeah, I spent 3 or 4 minutes just on this move to make sure that it was correct. And so, where can our opponent move? First of all, if our opponent moves here, we just take their queen with check. Like, easy, no problem. If our opponent moves to e8, again, we can take their queen with check. So if they move to either of the dark squares, the problem is that the knight is threatening the queen, right? So if we take their queen without check, then we're just trading queens and it's of no benefit to us. So the last thing that they could, in theory, do is play king d7, which they can do. And so now what we need to do is we need to do something where we move the queen somewhere, right? And if we move the queen, then we're no longer threatened by the knight. And if we can move the queen with check, like we did, then their king has to move somewhere. In particular, there are only a couple of reasonable moves here. There are only, I think, 2 legal moves, right? There's queen here and there's king here. But they move, and now our queen's no longer under threat, and we're still attacking their queen, so we win the queen. If, instead, our opponent tries to block, then this is just mate. So our opponent resigned once we played queen f5, but like it was actually pretty nice. If we look at the review, we played 95.6 accuracy and our opponent played 69.5, and you'll see that we gave up a small, like a third of a pawn advantage at the beginning, from like plus 0.2 to minus 0.3, so about half a pawn. But then we just like pretty slowly nurtured an advantage, and even in the moments where we weren't playing perfectly, we were continuing to increase the pressure on our opponent. We played like with activity rather than being materialistic, which was great. We nailed it.
Okay, I'm back from lunch to go play round 2. I'm pretty tired. I've got the like post-lunch like fall asleep vibes. No idea who I'm going to be playing next, and the lighting's weird because I parked in a parking garage because all the outdoor street parking was taken. So we're coming at you from the deep, dark, dank caves of the hotel parking garage. Anyways, I'm feeling fine about it. I'm looking forward to the next game. We'll see how it goes. Again, like in theory, I'm higher rated than these people, so I should maybe be able to make it. But I'm intentionally playing super aggressively, so if I lose, it's because I don't know what I'm doing, which is kind of the point. Like, let's have some fun. All right, see you after round 2. Bye. Okay, another round down. This one happened pretty quickly. I guess the game only lasted about an hour. I was playing a guy named Andy. I was playing black. He had won his first round game. He's rated, I don't know, 770 something. And he starts by playing knight f3, which I just don't have a response to. So I just tried to respond with c5, and we get into a game where I don't exactly know what's going on, and he's got this nice bishop on the long diagonal that it threatens a lot of tactics, so I have to spend a lot of mental energy dealing with that. But I finally managed to get into a position which seems relatively equal. I might even have a mild advantage. It's unclear, but I'm worried about castling, so I need to get my bishop out so I can castle. And I'm choosing between 2 moves, and one seems really safe, but it seems like it's gonna cause some issues. Like I'm gonna have to develop my knight in a way that I don't want to. So I'm like, oh, I'll play this other bishop move, which just totally overlooks like a very easy move. And I think that this sort of speaks to one of the problems that I'm noticing in my play, especially when I play over the board, which is when I'm making threats against my opponent, it's pretty easy for me because I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And then how is he going to respond? But when positions are equal, or when my opponents are trying to punish me, then I don't do a good job of thinking, oh, what are their threats? What do they want to do? What are the weaknesses in my position? So I need to spend a little bit more time thinking about what my opponent could respond in positions where I'm just trying to make a whatever move, because my spidey senses didn't go off, and then after that the game sort of rolled off the hinges relatively quickly. Haven't checked it with an engine yet. I don't think I played particularly well, but I'm curious to see whether or not the opening that I played was any good. Losing never feels good. It's not as bad now as it's been in the past. The first little bit it stung, but the guy next to me was in a winning position and then blundered checkmate and won, and that dude was furious. He wouldn't shut up, and he was slamming his pieces back into place when he was setting the board back up, and then he was still oh my gosh, walking out of the room. And then outside he was still pouting to himself. So at least we're not that involved. Admittedly, I wasn't winning, so it's not, I don't have the crash of I'm doing great, oh fuck, I lost. Definitely have some empathy for that guy, but that was pretty annoying, so I don't mind jabbing at him a little bit. We'll see though. I might have to play him in the next round. I'll let you guys know. That would be some spicy gossip for you guys. So we'll see. I think both of us are now going to be 1 out of 2. So maybe. And I think he's the second highest seed in our rating bracket. So TBD. Anyways, I've got about an hour and a half until the next round of the tournament starts, so I'm probably just going to turn on some NBA basketball and chill out. In theory, I could go home and then come back, but spending 15 minutes each way in the car to be able to chill at home for an hour, doesn't really seem worth it right now. All right, see you guys before the next round.
Okay, so on to game 2. I'm playing against Andy Nieto, rated 775, and I have the black pieces. And very first move, knight f3. This is called the ready opening, and nobody ever plays this against me, so I never have any idea what to do. It turns out that there are only two reasonable moves, e6 and c5. And you might be wondering, how is this different from, for example, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6? Like, why can't I just, in response to this, play knight c6? And the answer is that if our opponent plays d4, the best move is d5, and this is now, we can get into, like, just a queen's gambit declined that's, like, less good than the regular queen's gambit declined, because our knight's in the way of this pawn, which is going to need to move. Like, normally you want to be able to play c5 so that your bishop can recapture. That's not going to happen. So I, by random happenstance, happened to have the right intuition here and played c5, having recognized some of those things in the moment. And our opponent plays g3, very obviously getting ready to fianchetto and castle. This actually isn't particularly enterprising, but it was difficult for me to punish. So my thought was, okay, well, we're going to play d5. We're just going to take control of the center over on this side of the board. You can get your setup over here. We're going to take some space. Our opponent plays bishop g2. We play bishop f5. It turns out what we probably need to do is just go ahead and, like, my thought was I want to get my bishop over here because eventually, like, if I want to be able to target things over here, I'm going to push this pawn to e6. And when I push this pawn to e6, I want my bishop to be outside the pawn chain rather than inside the pawn chain. I feel like I'm getting a better queen's gambit declined. It turns out this is not as good as, for example, playing stuff like knight c6 or knight f6, but live and learn. We're figuring it out. So we play bishop f5. Makes some sense. Our opponent plays d3. They want to be able to stop threats along this diagonal. That makes some sense. We don't really want to push here because then they can push, and even though now we have a threat against this pawn, it doesn't really mean anything. So we play knight f6. We just continue to develop. We now recognize we're getting ready to play in this direction. We want to be able to defend this pawn in case this knight comes in here somewhere. This will be under attack, and the knight might be threatening something. So we're just going ahead and developing the knight to make sure that we continue to hold on to this d5 pawn. Our opponent plays bishop f4. This doesn't really do a ton for us, so we play knight c6. Like, fine, you can't get me to trade back here on this square, even though trading a bishop for a knight doesn't really make any sense. And this bishop, like, even though it seems kind of powerful in combination with this other bishop, actually is sort of in a fragile place. Our opponent plays knight bd2. We play e6 because we need to be able to sort of defend this pawn or get out along this diagonal eventually. Like, we're not going to be doing this, even though I think that might be a reasonable plan. It's not what we were going to do. And our opponent plays c4. Now, we have several options. We can take, and then we got this x-ray going on between the queens, and we have this pawn, which is a little unhealthy, and it's a little hard. It's also a little hard to get, like, this bishop into the game in a position where we're really comfortable. And we could also play bishop d6 and see trades and trades. But I recognize the fact that this bishop doesn't have a ton of squares that it can go to. For example, if the bishop moves back, we can just play pawn d4 and attack the bishop. Can't go here because knight takes. Can't go here because queen takes just for free. Obviously can't go here and here for similar reasons. Can't go here because a pawn would take it. And you can't go you can go here, like you can choose to play this pin. But not if I move my knight first. And so is there a way that I can attack this bishop and move my knight? The answer is yes, knight h5. This is not the best move in the position, but I felt pretty good about having sniffed it out because, again, this bishop has nowhere that it can go. So our opponent plays e3, which I think is just a clear mistake. The computer does not like it. You'll see that now already black has a pawn advantage, and it's because, like, now this pawn is undefended, right? So we play takes, and we take with our bishop. Our opponent plays queen b3, and this actually makes some sense. This is a fork against this, and we have no way to defend here because this pawn is in the way. So there are two reasonable moves to play in this position. One is you can play pawn takes, and one is you can play bishop takes. There's other crazy stuff you could do, like knight a5, but that doesn't really feel like it's in the spirit of the position. And so you think, okay, well, if I play pawn takes, then I've got this pawn over here that's a little awkward, and, like, what happens after we take here? And it's not really clear. It turns out that one of them, however, is a much better version of the other, and it turns out what we should play is pawn takes. And then if this happens, we're supposed to play queen c8, and then if our opponent moves their queen back, like things are not great for them here. We have a lot of control here. Like they're getting stuck. They're losing the thread here. However, if we play bishop takes, and we weren't going to be able to see this far enough ahead at the time, then our opponent plays a knight takes, pawn takes, and queen takes. So now they're taking a pawn. These two pawns are obviously weak. This one's defended by the bishop, but this one's defended by nothing. So we're in a little bit of an awkward space. So we could move our knight here, but then, like, this comes with check. So, like, that's a real problem. We'd have to move our knight back, and it's undefended. So, like, moving our knight somewhere, like, for example, moving our knight here makes it impossible for us to castle. Like, we have to worry about checks along this diagonal. And so, like, how can we protect this knight and sort of without having to move it? Or how can we protect this diagonal? Now, protecting the diagonal is a little bit too hard to do, because if we move, for example, the queen up here, then this rook is for free, because again, our opponent's forking several different things at once. And they're threatening here. Basically, this queen has 4 different threats. And so the easiest solution is to play queen c8 like we did in that other line, and then our opponent has to move their queen back. Now, they can't go here or here. They can't go here, obviously. They could trade queens, but I would actually be pretty fine with that, because we're just up in this position like we see here and here. This is fine for us. It's a relatively equal position. We're going to have a hard time holding on to this pawn. This pawn we should be able to defend for a while. Our opponent like has these doubled pawns, so even if they get both of these, like they have an unhealthy pawn over here, and then these two should be able to be attacked, etc. Like this would be fine for us. But our opponent plays queen b5, the only other reasonable move, which has a threat on this pawn. In theory, has a threat on this pawn, but again, it's defended by the bishop, etc. And we play rook b8, which is good. We just want to kick the queen out. We want to, like, if he's going to take here, fine. We do that. Now, there are 2 or 3 different reasonable moves to play here. You could play bishop here, you could play bishop here, but you'll also notice that we're threatening this pawn. And so my thought was, okay, well, we have 4 versus 4 over here, and we have 2 versus 2 here, and this pawn's probably not going to be healthy forever. But if we can take this pawn and get some rook trades, then, like, it doesn't matter that this pawn isn't healthy. It'll be 1 versus 1, and it'll be 4 on 4, but we have an easier potential to create a passed pawn over here, potentially. So we'll see. But I thought, okay, let's take this. Turns out this is totally wrong, and it'll become obvious why. Our opponent castles, and this just gets him out of any threats. Otherwise, we have lots of sticky stuff when it comes to moving this bishop out. Now, the threat that I did not see was our opponent's, let's say we make a nothing move, our opponent can play here, which forks the rook and this pawn. And that doesn't matter, like, right now, because we can just, our bishop's defending, so we can just, like, move our rook back, and we're okay. Things are fine. Ish. Obviously, the computer doesn't love this for several different reasons. But, like, this is not the worst thing in the world. However, if we move this bishop, then this pawn and this rook are both undefended, and we're going to have a fork happening, and that's going to ruin our potential castle, right? So if we play bishop e7, then when our opponent plays queen here, like bishop e7, queen here, our bishop can go here. We're defending against both threats. Things are fine. They can, like, break the seal by going here, but then we can move our rook back, right? So we can do something like this, and then this, and then if we see something like, this, like, you know, not this is not great for us, but it's fine. Like, our opponent's up the exchange, but we got some threats going on. However, if we play bishop d6, then when our opponent plays here, we can't get on this diagonal. This stupid pawn, which has been bad for most of the game, is actually a huge asset now, and so we're in trouble. So we play queen b8. We save the rook. We didn't want to move it back. I was thinking, okay, if I'm going to lose some pawns over here, I at least want to have some counterplay. My opponent plays queen takes g7. I play rook f8 because I have to save the rook, and this pawn's hanging. And my opponent, to their credit, plays knight g5 because they're like, look, I can take this pawn whenever I want. I'd like to take it in a position where I can also be threatening this rook, and I've got checks coming on this diagonal, etc. And we're falling apart here. We're not doing well. So we play knight d4 because we want to be able to play here. Look, if you're not gonna take this with your queen, then we want to keep the queen over here and then get some counterplay on the queen side. This is actually a fine move. Our opponent plays knight takes h7, and we threaten the queen. Look, you can have my rook. I'll take your queen. Like, this is a good trade for us. You'll see that, like, great. So our opponent has to play something else, and our opponent plays bishop c6 check. Now, one thing that I was thinking is, okay, so if I move up and my opponent moves queen here, then I can play this, and then my opponent can't check anymore because my knight defends, right? Like, we're doing okay. We should be able to have some threats. It'll be okay. However, that's not the check that my opponent's going to play. My opponent's going to play here because the knight defends, and that's checkmate. And that's how the game ended. Not a great look for us, but you live with it. We just made some subtle mistakes in a position that otherwise felt boring. In particular, taking this pawn over here was probably a little bit overambitious, but once we got in a position where our rook was hanging, we really needed to be more careful about where our bishop was developed. Live and learn. As for the accuracies, our opponent played 87.8, so they played great, and we only played 65.6, so we're not playing particularly well, but that's okay. You'll notice that we played 3 different blunders, and a lot of them came at the position where we were, like, already totally losing. So, meh.
All right, folks. I've done nothing except lie in my car and watch videos the last hour and 15 minutes. The Memphis-Minnesota game is really exciting. It's close to the end of the third quarter, but I won't be able to see that. That's fine. We're getting ready for round 3. If it goes white, black, then I think I'll have white in this round, but I might have black and then I'll have white in the 4th round. It doesn't really matter to me. And because I didn't just have to, like, skip around like happened last time, that'll be a positive for me. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. Um, oh, I just hope I get to play like a relatively normal opening. I need to be a little more diligent about what my opponent can do. I need to think all the way through there. No skipping turns. I'm not using my time effectively enough. I can play a little slower. Anyways, we'll jump in now. We'll see how it's gone. I'll see you guys after the game. All right, just played a nice young German boy named Matten, or Matan. I don't know. He never said his own name out loud. Tough. A very young kid. This was his first tournament that wasn't a Scholastic tournament. He's rated like 316. But he played pretty well. He like knew his opening. He played the Scandinavian. We had a very interesting position. I think that he might have been doing well, but he got a little bit too greedy, and he played something where he thought he was able to like sacrifice a piece for a pawn in exchange for like putting me in check, and then eventually would be able to fork my rook and knight. So he essentially would be, what is that? Two pieces for a rook and a pawn, something like that. Except my king was going to be exposed, and it was going to be weird. Anyways, we got to this intense position, and he just didn't calculate the fact that when I retook with the pawn, it was check, and he immediately resigned, which I was a little bit surprised by. He's only down a piece. Like, my king still has to find some safety. He's going to be able to attack down the g-file. I think that objectively, I probably am going to win, and it, like, helps that I'm, like, an adult, so it looks like I know what I'm doing. But I think there was probably still life to the position, I mean, in these low-rated games. That being said, he's a young kid, so you can't really fault him for being like, well, I guess I'm not really doing well. I guess I'll move on then. Fair enough. That puts me at 2 out of 3. So going into the last round, so his brother was 2 for 2 and playing the guy that beat me in the last round, and so they're both at 2 points, and whoever wins will be at 3 points, and I'm at 2 points. And so if I get to play, if his brother wins instead of the guy that I was playing against from last round, then I might get to play him, and if I beat him, then I would tie for first. Of course, I think there might be some other people that also could have 2 out of 3. So whether or not they allow me to play the person that has 3 depends upon like who wins that game or if there's a winner. And then on top of that depends on like how they choose to do the pairings. Which, if I have to play somebody that's been winning all the games, like you know. But also, it'd be fun to have the opportunity. I'm not sweating it too much. I've got 2 hours until the next round, so I've got to decide what to do with my time. Probably not just going to sit in my car the whole time, because that ain't so great. So I probably will drive home and chill out a little bit and then come back for the last round. But feeling good. Always, again, like I was saying earlier, fun to get to play the kids, but then rough, because if you beat them, you feel bad. And if they beat you, you feel bad. So there's no... I guess I don't have that like good dad energy of being excited to get beaten or like happy to beat the kids, you know? I'm just like, oh man, they're probably upset. But then also, like, I don't know. They seem to take it better than some of the adults do, we'll put it that way. Anyways, I'm going to quit rambling. I'll see you guys before round 4. Things are going well.
All right, so let's take a look at game 3. I'm now 1 for 2, and I'm playing Matan Vilenchik, who's rated 316. And I played e4, and I was, again, hoping for e5, f4 to be able to play my King's Gambit. But my opponent played d5, the Scandinavian defense, and the one that I'm used to is the exchange version, where you do this, and then you get your knight out to harass the queen, and the queen moves over to a4, you take the center, and then unclear what knight f6 is. I'm not sure that I really understand that move, but I play here because I want this x-ray on the queen because it allows for some tactics later. So my opponent plays c6, and that's so that the queen is going to be able to like retreat along the diagonal. Like it's not just along this row, which you'll notice a lot of the squares along this row are taken. Basically, only queen f5 is available at the moment. But now the queen can retreat here without having to get stuck either in like one of these 2 awkward squares. Fair enough. I play knight f3 because at some point I would like to castle and. Mostly that, just developing my pieces. The knight wasn't doing anything there. My opponent played bishop f5. And at first I wasn't really sure what this was doing, but usually in the Scandinavian defense, you usually end up seeing pawns on c6 and e6. And this really just makes it impossible for us to use the d5 square. And it's really hard to like push through. Like this semi-open file like isn't something that we can really use, and it becomes really hard for us to play against. And I think my opponent wanted their bishop outside, because otherwise their bishop's like stuck in here, and you got to push stuff, and then you've weakened the central bind you have. So that makes some sense, actually. But in response, I played knight e4. So why is this available? So we have this x-ray, and what we'd really like is we'd like to be able to, for example, take this knight and trade it off, opening this line of the king, and then potentially we'll be able to go here and castle, and we're going to be able to potentially get some attack going on against what's going on the e-file. So we play knight e4, because again, you can't take, because the bishop takes, we take the queen, right? Doesn't happen. So my opponent plays queen c7, totally reasonable move, and we take. Now, normally what you would expect is you'd expect for the opponent to play takes e7, and you can play something like check, and then you get something like this, and black's actually a little bit better here, but at least in this position, like, you know, white has some play. Probably not the best move to play check in castles, but there are things to do in this position. However, my opponent did not play e takes. My opponent played g takes, which is wild, because even though they get the semi-open file against my king, the downside is, like, what is going on here? Like, where is their king going to be safe? Like, are they going to stay in the center? Or are they going to do something like this? Are they going to try and castle queenside, even though they've got this monster set of open diagonals? Like, this didn't smell right to me. So I said bishop c4. It's like, look, I'm going to want to castle. There's potential threats against this pawn at some point in the future if I can get out here, for example. So it seems like a good enough square. Doesn't inhibit my pawns. My opponent played e6 because they recognize the threat here. They potentially want to be able to step up. They need to be able to get their bishop out, for example. Obviously not to that square, but their bishop out somewhere. Also not to that, but, you know, and I played queen c1. And the reason I wanted to play queen c1 is I saw that eventually I was going to want to be able to do something along this diagonal. In order to be able to move my bishop out to do something active, I would need it to be supported by my queen. It turns out this move is not particularly good. It's fine, but it equalizes the game and what otherwise should be a position that's to our advantage. And my opponent here played c5, and I couldn't really figure out what they were trying to do. We could play bishop here, but then takes, and this is apparently really bad for me for reasons that I don't see. Tell me what's wrong, computer. Oh, well, that just hangs a bishop. Yeah, so fair. I guess this. Oh, and I did see that in the game actually is this X-ray is a problem for me, right? If I there are going to be threats against, for example, if I play takes, and I make some, even if I just castle, right? There's takes here, and my opponent's won another pawn, and this does not seem good. Even though there's no king safety, I don't want that. So I was like, you know what? I don't have to take that pawn. But what I do notice is that there's a check to happen here, and it would be really nice if my bishop were supported when this happens. For example, if I play check here and we see something like knight here, I don't like the fact that this bishop is loose. In particular, if I ever move this, then there are things to check and take. I don't want that, so I play a4. I'm just like, look, you can take me if you want. My opponent takes, and I play check, knight c6, and I take back with my knight, right? So now I've got two attackers on this knight, like 1, 2. Well, let's get rid of this line, and my opponent has two defenders, but now his queen is tied down, and we have the potential, for example, to kick away the queen, somewhere back here. We're gaining some activity. We're still getting some stuff done. And there's actually a second threat here, which is even if we don't end up kicking this queen away from this square, we also have the threat to win the two bishops, and we've got two bishops against the knight and a bishop. This light square bishop will be unopposed, and that can be what we try and lean on. And our opponent will end up with Irish pawns. So my opponent castles, I play takes, my opponent plays takes, and he actually turned to his brother, who was playing in the tournament, and pointed at his own pawns and was like, look at this. This is really funny. Because it is really funny. I mean, the material, we've got 6 pawns against 6 pawns, but are you really going to tell me that these 3 pawns are worth 3 pawns? The computer doesn't think so, but the position's actually more equal than I would have expected. Anyways, in this position, I played bishop f4 because I was like, look, we've got all these open stuff against the queen, but we don't want our bishop sort of like stuck in this position. Things get awkward in a hurry. So I was like, look, let's just get our bishop out there. My opponent played queen a5 check, which is fine. So I can go back, but I don't want to go back because then like trades. Like, I mean, we'd win an exchange there, but it does not seem pleasant for us. Also, for example, we can see here and here, like that does not seem to be in our favor. It gets a little tricky because you have moves like c3, but I just played c3 directly. I was like, I don't understand like what the beef is here. I guess you can move your knight. My opponent does move their knight, and you'll notice that this is a blunder. So first of all, I can't take because it's pinned. There are several problems here, but the chief one is what I played, which is b4. It's just like, look, you got to move your queen, and then once you move your queen, I'm not pinned, and then I can take your knight. And my opponent seemed ready for this. They were just like, look, I can play bishop takes, and then if you take, then I take with check, and it's fine. But that's not true because when we take here, it's check. So now our opponent has 2 choices. One is to play queen here, which is just mate in 1 because our bishop stares at this square. That's having this bishop along this active diagonal is useful. And the other one is you can defend with your knight is the only other, I guess technically there's another legal move where you can play here. But like, that doesn't seem useful. And again, these killer bishops, So you play here, and then you just take your queen. Like, this is not... You're just down a queen for nothing. So our opponent miscalculated that tactic, and in... oh, come on. Get us to the right spot. And in this position, our opponent resigned. So pretty good. If we look at the review, again, we played with 92 accuracy, including one great move. And our opponent played 68 accuracy, so they lost the thread a little bit. And the one great move here is c3, which is the only good move. But again, like, I'm not sure that I entirely understand that, but fine. It seemed relatively obvious to me at the time. Nonetheless, happy to get a win. Now we're 2 out of 3, feeling pretty good about it. Like, no qualms there.
Okay, folks, I went home and I watched some NBA playoff basketball for a while, and my roommate Thomas and I complained about how much we both hate James Harden, and so now we're back for round 4, end of the day. Don't know who I'm playing yet, but there's a potential that I could be playing for the possibility to tie at first place. I'm going to try not to stress out too much about it. Just have one more game to go, play another good game. Try not to outthink my instincts too much, and stay focused on what my opponent can do. All right, see you guys after the game. Okay, let me set the stage for you for the stakes of the round, because I only found that out like right before the game, which provides a lot of flavor. So I'll tell you. So, one kid was 3-0 on the day. He had 3 points, and then there were 10 people in the section. It was 1 at 3 points, 4 people at 2 points, 4 people at 1 point, and 1 person at 0 points, right? Which makes sense, all the numbers add up. And so I'm the highest rated person of the people that went 2 and 3 earlier in the day. And my opponent was the guy that had 3 points. And so the other people that played 2 of them had 2 points, played each other, and then one of the 2 points played a 1 point. And those people all, as far as I can tell, like, one of the people won their games that was in second place. And then I think the guy that has 2 points is playing somebody that has 1 point, and I think he's going to win, but I'm not sure. I looked at his board. I think so. We'll find out later. So if I beat this kid, who's the brother of the kid that I played in the third round, if I beat this kid, then anyone with 2 points that wins their game ties for first, including me. If this kid manages to draw me or beat me, then he walks away with sole first place. And I'm not even in second place. I'm like totally middle of the pack. So a lot's riding on this game for me and for my opponent and for a bunch of other people who are interested in the game then, because like if I don't win, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so it's the last round. Our opponent has 3 out of 3. We and a bunch of other people have 2 out of 3. And if I win the game, then our opponent's the only one with 3 out of 3, so then they drop down to 3 out of 3, and everybody else with 2 out of 3 can only get to 3 out of 3, so I will have tied for first if I can win this game. And I recognize that, and my opponent recognizes that. Now, the board says they're rated 647, but they were rated over 900 after this tournament, obviously because they were beating a bunch of people. So we don't have to take that into account, but they played pretty well. Now, luckily, since my opponent and I had both had 2 whites, I ended up getting the white pieces. So we play e4, and again, we're looking for e5, f4 takes, and knight f3. We want to play our King's Gambit. That's what we're here for. We're trying to swashbuckle some people, But our opponent plays c5. We've seen e5, we've seen d5, now we get to see c5, the Sicilian defense. Now, I've been playing the open Sicilian, which is, here, takes, and then, usually something like this. And, it's a fine way to play, but I'd been having trouble with it. It had not been going well for me. So instead, I play c3, the Alpine Sicilian, which I played for a while earlier. I don't really know the theory that well, but I know that white gets a strong center. You end up being able to trade c-pawn for c-pawn, rather than, for example, trading d-pawn for c-pawn. And so it ends up being quieter positions than the open Sicilians where you castle opposite sides and get mated because you don't know all the theory. Because, man, these kids know a lot. This is actually the brother of the guy that I played in round 3. I don't know if I mentioned that. So my opponent plays knight f6, attacking this pawn, and I already don't know what I'm doing. It's move 3, I don't know what I'm doing, so I spend a while figuring it out, and I play e5. Now, if my opponent plays here, obviously he takes. My opponent can't go there to attack the pawn, so we've bought ourselves at least a little bit of time. And my opponent plays knight d5. They get into the center of the board. I think something like this is, in theory, possible. In fact, that might be the move, but we went ahead and just played d4, because we know that we're just going to trade these 2 pawns, and that'll be okay. So it takes, and my opponent plays knight. They're attacking here. We do have a defender, but we'd like to over-defend so that we, in theory, can move our queen at some point, so we play knight f3. Our opponent plays d6. Now, if something like takes, check, we're just helping our opponent develop, the check isn't particularly useful. I didn't like the thought of takes. So instead, I played bishop e2. I was I know that this is a move that I'm going to want to play. I'd like to castle. I would like for things to be calm. I'm just going to play a boring position until eventually I can outsmart my opponent. My opponent takes, and if I play knight takes, then my opponent plays knight takes here, and, clearly that drops the knight. I'm trying to remember what exactly I was worried about here. I guess something like takes and takes, and I guess this pawn feels hard to defend because we don't have an additional defender there, though I guess we can play something like f4 in the short term. But then where are we castling? Like this gets into an awkward position. I didn't like it. So I played d takes. So now we have this same pawn, but this knight at least is here defending it. And we still have the opportunity to castle as long as we can find good ways to defend this pawn, which ends up being the problem for the next little while. So our opponent plays g6 because they want to play here. And I choose to play b3, which is apparently problematic, but basically when my opponent plays bishop g7, I want to play bishop b2. Now we each have a knight and a bishop on the pawn, and we're getting ready to castle, they're getting ready to castle. We just have to defend this pawn. Like this, the trouble with the opening as we see it here is that we're in a position where it's a little bit hard to defend, but it's okay. So my opponent plays queen a5 check, and the easiest way to like not lose the thread of what's going on is just to play queen d2. If my opponent goes anywhere other than taking or going back, I guess they can go here as well, but like this knight is presently undefended. So we go here, our opponent takes, and we get to develop a knight for free. And this is nice because then we can play knight c4 to triple defend this pawn, and that allows us to move one of these pieces when that time comes. So our opponent plays knight f4, and they want to take this bishop. Now we can't castle because that just wins the bishop for free. And we could move the bishop somewhere, like we could go here, but I didn't like that because the other problem is that our opponent can play like knight takes here, right? So if we go somewhere like here, our opponent plays knight takes, and they have a huge advantage, right? Like we're not castling on this side. If we castle on this side, we're castling into an open file. It seems bad. So we have to defend this and this. It's a fork, and so our options are like stay here and defend the bishop and move this pawn, or move the bishop to where it defends the pawn, but then we can't castle. And so between the two, g3 seems like the best move, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. They take and I take. Now my king's like. We've traded a bunch of pieces, like their pieces are relatively inactive and they're not like coming for my king anytime soon. Like this feels like a fine position for me. My opponent plays b6, and the reason is they want to get on this diagonal, and I recognize the fact that like this knight, if I move a knight here, this knight is going to be not undefended per se, but like if we try and get our, so for example, if we play knight here, they play bishop here, we play rook here, they play castles and we play here, then our opponent has the opportunity to like take a bunch of times, and then they get to like take the bishop here, right? Like or take the knight here, and that's no good for us. So the moves that I've made up here actually aren't that bad for me, but I was trying to solve the problem of how can I move this knight but still keep this knight defended. And so the first thing I thought is, okay, well, let's defend this. The other problem that I saw is I saw bishop here. I saw so like let's say I move somewhere like here, then I saw a bishop here, and I can't get my king like out into safety. I have to step up into the middle of the board, and again, this does not seem good for us. So to defend against that check threat, I played rook ac1. I was like, you have to defend your knight. Like if you play this check, then I'm going to step up, and then you have to like you're going to have to solve this problem. So my opponent obliges and plays bishop b7. And again, I'd like to play something like rook he1, but it's not the right time for it. Instead, I play knight c4 because, again, I have to calculate a bunch of tactics against this pawn. It's just really hard to defend this because like we can remove this defender if my king ever moves, and then I have like the wrong number of defenders on this square. So my opponent raised rook d8, and I play rook he1. It's finally time for me to get back into safety. My opponent plays e6. Now, the problem with e6 is that this knight was just defending this pawn and doing nothing else. Like, you can't go here, you can't go here. But now that e6 has been played, I have, like, this fork on display. And so, like, the one thing that I recognize in addition to having that fork is that then, like, for example, if I play takes, what does my opponent have in this position? Oh, yes, there's that undefended bishop. So, like, in order to be able to play this move, we have to defend this bishop because, again, like this X-ray is going to become a problem for us if we have to recapture with the pawn. So I play bishop a3, preventing my opponent from castling and saying, like, okay, now we don't have this X-ray, and I've removed a defender here, but it's two defenders and two attackers, so you can't do anything, and this check is coming, and I'm forking these pieces. And so my opponent played a pretty smart move, actually, which is b5, and the thought here is if takes, then b4, and this is defending, and my bishop can't go anywhere because if they go back here, like this is happening, right? So then we essentially get a pawn, but this is going to be weak. My opponent's king is going to be able to step up. Like, for example, if we like play another couple of moves out, then like my opponent is obviously drastically ahead in this position. They've got 2 pieces for the rook, and this pawn's going to fall, and then they'll be just 2 pieces up for a rook. That's no good for us. However, what our opponent did not see is that when they played this move, when I play knight d6, and they play rook d6, the bishop can take. Now, at this point, I would have expected my opponent to continue to play on. Like, there's actually plenty to play for here. Like, the attackers and defenders here, there's still some work to be done. Takes. Like, they'll eventually be able to castle, use the open file. Like, there's some work to be done here. They're just down in exchange. But my opponent immediately recognized their blunder and resigned, and that was the end of the game. So if we look at the review, once again, 92.5 accuracy. And if we look at this great move, this knight d6 check, huge deal. Because, again, we have to deal with this threat. But recognizing that the bishop can move back to take is a big deal. Now, my opponent played the best of any of my opponents that didn't win the game. They played 83.8, and so we got to give them a lot of props.
So luckily, I have white. So I got to play 3 whites today, which was, whew, we take that. And I play e4. I'm coming after him. He wants to draw. I'm going to play the King's Gambit. And he plays c5, and I'm like, oh, okay, fine. I've been trying to learn the Alapin Sicilian a little bit this week. He immediately plays knight f6, and I don't know what to do. So we're like 3 moves into the game. I have no idea what I'm doing. And from there, we play like a pretty intense game where he's slightly outmaneuvering me because he knows the line. And we get to this very interesting position where there's lots of pins, and I'm trying to protect like one pawn that's really far gone, but the material's totally equal. And I see my opponent plays a move, and it opens something up for me. But I can't play it right away. So I play a little bit of a waiting move that like then introduces a lot of tactics I found out when I saw my opponent's response. And so my opponent plays a response, and he overlooked one small facet, which you guys will see in the game recap later. He overlooked one thing. So I played the move that he knew I was going to play, and then he made a good he made like the top computer response, and what would be a really good response if there were not if there was not the fact that I was able to like move a piece out of the way of danger and recapture in the same move. And that meant that I was up in exchange, and I won. And my opponent resigned at that point, which I would never have resigned just for losing in exchange. But there was also like a very far advanced pawn and a bishop that was preventing his king from castling, and like a bunch of, he was going to have a weird time trying to untangle for sure. So, he was like, I was down in exchange just at that point, what is there to play for? And I was like, bro, we're like 1,000 rated, but whatever. So we talked about it afterwards. Kid was very nice. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. I played a good game. I was very resilient. I tried to pay attention to my opponent's threats. I spent a lot of time calculating. There were several times I was about to make a move, which was going to be a serious blunder that I didn't. And the result is that, like, I come out of the tournament tied for first, three out of 4, which, given that I'm the highest rated person in the section, like, you would expect that something like that would be the case. And one of the people that I think is going to end up tied for first was totally winning a game and then, like, blundered checkmate and won. So he should have been 4-0. So, like, I probably am not even the best among this set of people. But I feel really good. It's nice to finally, you go to a bunch of these things, you're losing a ton of your games, you're trying really hard to like see any success at all, and it's nice to like, I'm probably still going to lose rating points from this tournament, but it's nice to like get a game where you like get a tournament where you like can string together a few wins. I obviously need to like study my openings a little bit more. Every time I get to like move 3 or 4 and I'm like, what am I doing? And I'm playing against people that like very clearly understand what they're doing that far in. I think that there's a small advantage to the fact that I'm figuring out as I go, because that means that I get like all the benefit of like having the position, like the themes of the position or what the tactics are or whatever. I've thought about them like 5 seconds ago when I made my previous move, and my opponents have to like, they know what the move is, but do they remember why the move is that? So like there are pros and cons, but it would be a lot better if I was able to practice some of these openings a little bit more. I think also I need to learn more gambits. Like, I know that going all the way up to the grandmaster level or whatever, it's not completely sound, but like, it'd be nice to like build some over the board mojo and like be able to play some aggressive positions and like get people into my territory rather than the other way around. Now that's going to require some time and I have to do some work. But I think that's probably what's next for me. I think there's another one of these tournaments in a couple of weeks, so we'll do something like that, hopefully. But yeah, no, just feeling really good, folks. It was a good tournament. I had a lot of fun. Tied for first, I think, with 3 other people or something that are all 3 out of 4. So I think like $160 prize, I'm gonna win 40, which is like maybe my entrance fee, maybe half of my entrance fee, unclear. But I don't care. I'll probably even donate the money. It's not that the money matters. Yeah. Man, it was a good time, folks. It was a good time. I'm glad you were here with me.
So that shapes up the tournament. We won. It was good. Yeah. I don't know that I have much else to say other than that the fact that I knew I was going to be playing aggressive openings rather than these like quiet openings where we're like worried about losing a pawn and then like slowly losing. It's like, no, why don't we play something where we know there are going to be a ton of tactics and then we can just sit there and figure it out. Those are a little clearer because everything, like the threats are bigger. There's not the threat of like, oh, a pawn push or whatever, and like in 10 moves I'm losing. It's like if I play the wrong move, this move I'm losing, which means I should be able to figure out what's happening in this move. And that bore out for us. We'll get a check in the mail at some point. I don't know when we'll get that or what it'll be or whatever, and I'll probably just donate it back to their chess club. But yeah, exciting to have won. Appreciate you guys being around to do this with me, and I'm looking forward to playing again. I think there's another tournament coming up in another week or two that I'll have yet again another opportunity to like show out. I think probably something I need to consider is whether or not I want to be playing in higher rating sections in the future. One thing is I won this tournament, but I'll try and put it on screen. My rating actually went down from this tournament because even though we went 3 out of 4, everyone we played was so much lower rated than us. And so if we have a similar thing where our results are worse, but our opponents are stronger rated, then we'll end up higher rated, right? Like when we beat the very first game of rated chess we ever played where we played that 1400 rated player, like that's why our rating like anchored sort of in the like 1300 range and then like slowly has been decaying. And I think we need to keep playing stronger players because like when we played those 1800s in New Jersey, admittedly I was studying a lot at the time, but we had shots to win 2 of those games. That would have been a really big deal for us. Anyways, I think that's all I've got for you today. I really appreciate you guys being here. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Drop in the comments if you have other stuff that you want to see out of me. All right. Peace.